If you're on YouTube right now, click the like button just to start. You're already here. You must like us a little bit. So just do it. It helps us out tremendously.
And the subscribe button as well. We'll get to 500 here soon.
You might as well. It's just a button over. Just scroll over to the right. There it is. We're going to get to 500 before the season starts, but it's obviously a very big day because we are covering a Power 4 conference, and we have a ton of new teams to cover, including 3 new faces within the conference. Cal, Stanford, SMU joined the ACC this year. We will cover them all. Some of them shorter than others, just due to time constraints, but we will give you the most info possible. Before we start, we're going to go right into it, but before we start, we want to remind everybody out there to shop No Rivals, shopnorivals.com. Check for your team. If it's not there, there's a request a team button. Let the team over at No Rivals know what team you're looking for so they can get those updated and you can get some cool gear. Good news is, if you're a Georgia fan and you're in here, the dogs drop next week. So get on there, get ready to see some Georgia caps. App State just dropped, Tulsa just dropped. Use the code PTFS at checkout and you will get free shipping. We cover it for you. So don't worry about the price of the hat and then plus $8. We cover it. So with that said, the boys are all here. Let's briefly talk to them before we start team-by-team previews. Reese, tough week, but you're here and ready to talk ball. You ready to go?
Yeah, we've had an interesting week up here in New York, to say the least. But I found my new hobby. If you follow me on Instagram and you just happen to see like any, I don't know, WNBA post or just any sort of cheesy post for the NFL, NCAA, I commented on one today with Shedeur Sanders. It's like Shedeur Sanders hasn't been alive since Colorado won a conference title. That's crazy. I love throwing sarcastic comments and kind of starting fights on Instagram. So if you follow me, make sure you're looking for those somewhere. It's
how much do you get a response? Like, what's your response percentage?
Well, I my best one. I sent a screenshot to JP, but I did a fight, my first college football fight ever on social media. I'm not even an Iowa or Iowa State fan, but I'm sorry, Parks, but I went to a fight with a Nebraska guy, and I'm pretty sure I slam dunked on his ass. But that one got a lot of engagement. And then there was a Yankee one where it's like some guy booted a ball and they're like, the Yankees are done for him. Like, you guys are 54 and 35. Will you please shut up? And like that one has a lot of engagement too. So it's fun. You got to go in there and talk to some people. I like it.
He's a troll. He's a troll.
That is troll.
Fan bases that, I mean, it's a good time if you've never done it before. JP, how are we doing tonight? We ready to talk a little ACC football?
I'm doing good. I was going to wear my SMU shirt since I was covered on here, but I figured let's stay a little more neutral here. I was going to give that all a spin around, but pumped to do the ACC. I think it's our first run at a conference of this size. So we're going to try something new. I'm pumped to see how that goes.
Yeah, it should be clean, at least in our mind when we planned it out. It sounds like a clean idea, and we will do that towards the end of the episode. You should have definitely worn the SMU shirt. Jake, if you have a shirt for a conference, you got to wear it during the preview, right?
Yeah, I got a couple options, I guess. I just didn't wear either one of them.
I didn't
wear my Syracuse stuff.
I got an Arizona State shirt. So, yeah, we really dropped the ball there.
Yeah, we did. I don't know if I have any ACC stuff. I'm trying to think.
I have a Clemson.
No Ramblin' Rex.
I feel like I
Louisville polo.
I also sent you a Pitt shirt. I don't know if it's too big.
Yeah, I still have that Pitt shirt. I have Notre Dame, if you want to count Notre Dame.
Yeah,
we did cover Notre Dame in here.
Yeah, so I feel like we can't. But all right, let's get into it. We've already 7 minutes deep, and we have 17 teams to take you through. Let's lead it off with team-by-team previews. This will be our normal format that we use for the group of 5 to start. And we're going to lead it off with the most important one in most people's mind, and that is Florida State. Jake is taking us through the Seminoles, who are picked to win the ACC again in 2024, looking to retain that title. Jake, tell us about this team this year.
Yeah, I'm excited to take you guys through this team. Probably, a future Big 12 team. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I'm a Big 12 guy. I have to poke the bear a little bit.
I've seen both conferences everywhere. I've seen Big 12. I've seen Big 10 today.
The Florida State does not want to be in the same conversation as Big 12. Florida State fans do not. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about what's going to happen in 2024 with the Seminoles. New change of scenery for quarterback DJ Uiagalelei. Comes back to the ACC. Everybody's pretty familiar with him at this point. He's one of those quarterbacks who's been around the block for quite some time now. I'm excited for him. I'm excited for the Seminoles team. I'm not sure if it's as talented as the undefeated team last year, but that might just be because of some unfamiliarity and some inexperience so far. But I think maybe as the season progresses along, we'll see some strides with Mike Norvell. it's kind of going to be the same story with Mike Norvell every year. He's going to bring in a lot of transfers. Hopefully he's going to find a lot of guys who can plug and play right away. I think he did in this transfer portal class. And we're going to just see how they stride out because they got an interesting start to the schedule. Along with DJU, you got Keziah Holmes. He's going to take the running back spot. Had about 600 yards last year. So a familiar spot. He was like their second, third back. He's going to be a guy that Seminole fans are familiar with. And I think he's ready to take the jump as the number one guy. The offensive line, I think, is something that they can rely on. I think it's going to be a spot that DJU can rely on. The tackles, the center, all are back. That's going to be huge for them. And then they filled the guard spots with a couple of transfers who have experience. So I think that's a good production piece. I think this is an offensive line that's going to stride out big in the ACC this year. Who's going to replace Keon Coleman? I'm looking at Malik Benson, the transfer. Can he take that jump as this big playmaker for DJU? I think they're going to need it, but it's also going to start with the run game because it's just, well, it was like with Damian Martinez last year for DJU at Oregon State. He's better when you can run the football. So they're going to rely on Holmes, and then Benson's got to make some big plays. The defense is a spot where I think this is going to be a pretty solid group. It brings in, it's almost like Alabama U. I think they brought in 3 or 4 guys from Alabama after Saban retired. And another piece is defensive end Marvin Jones Jr. This is one of the more underrated transfer gets in the entire class. I think he's going to be really, really good at the defensive end. I think he's going to not skip a beat when he goes from the SEC to ACC play. Earl Little Jr., a linebacker that can fill a spot from Alabama, is going to be a nice piece. Duroger is a guy at the defensive tackle spot. I'm not sure if he's going to start right away. He comes over from West Virginia, but all the Power 4 depth you can get on the defensive line going to be huge for this football team going forward. Guys who are back from the team last year that are going to be first or second team all conference guys. I look at defensive end Patrick Payton, safety Shaheem Brown. These are going to be the stars of the defense along with Jones Jr. from Georgia. I think this is going to be a solid group compared to the offense. I talked about the interesting start to the season. They open up with Georgia Tech in Ireland. I think everybody's pretty familiar with that, this week 0 game this year. And then they have Boston College. So kudos to them. I mean, I don't know if the ACC kind of set them up that way, but it's not like they're going out and playing an FCS school and then going to play a bottom tier Sunbelt school. They got conference play started right away. So we're going to find out pretty quickly if this team can gel with these transfers and new faces in town.
Obviously, fans are very excited for the upcoming season. They have high odds to make the college football playoff. They're expected to this year. Obviously left with this salty taste in their mouths after last year to both the committee and the rest of college football fans because they were not kind about it over the offseason. JP, what do you got on the Seminoles in 24?
Yeah, for me, this is one of the more interesting teams in the ACC because of the reload through the portal, right? Like if you're looking at Florida State last year, they hit on pretty much everybody they brought in, right? And the year before with Jared Verse, they hit everybody. Now you have to do that again in a lot of the skill position spots. And that's my worry, right? Like it doesn't always gel. It may gel well, but to the height that they need to be to maybe win an ACC title and grab an at-large bid, even if they don't win the ACC. I think that's the part. And I don't think their schedule does them too many favors. I think they have one of the tougher ACC schedules. I mean, when you get Cal, SMU, Clemson, Miami, and I mean, not that Notre Dame's a ACC
Memphis
game,
is
but
your
nonetheless,
G5 team coming to town. That's
not
your
an easy schedule. So I think they'll be a really good football team again. It'll be interesting to watch. And I don't think people need to sit there and worry too much about DJU. I've been an advocate for the guy. I think he fits in where you can get him into a spot where he can be successful is when he has pieces around him and you don't ask too much of him. And I'm hoping Norvell lets him be him rather than expecting him to be a Jordan Travis with the football.
I think DJU was in a good spot last year, kind of where up at Oregon State, he was kind of under the radar. I mean, they had a good year. They were in the spotlight for some games due to their ranking, but like he wasn't the talk of the town like you are at Clemson in the ACC. And they will match up at some point, so that'll be a fun storyline to follow. But all right, there is Florida State in 2024. Let's move down the list. We are going to JP. JP is going to take us through one of the new members, and that is the SMU Mustangs. JP, tell us about this team in 2024.
Yeah, got a chance to visit down in Dallas in the SMU campus and everything they're kind of doing around campus and some remodeling to the stadium down there to get ready for this ACC jump. It's proven tough to make the jump to a Power 4 conference, as we've seen from pretty much everybody in the Big 12 when teams made a jump to the Big Ten. It was been a little bit outside of Nebraska's first couple of years. Rutgers struggled, Maryland struggled. Teams struggled jumping in the Power 4 level, and that's from a Power 4 conference. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle things. It's tough to beat the quarterback room for them. I think this is one of the better quarterback rooms in the ACC. I think it's one of probably the better skill position groups in the ACC as well. You have Preston Stone. If he can get healthy, I think he's kind of slowly working his way back in. He broke his leg late last in the year. Kevin Jennings came in, won that American Conference title, and played in the bowl game for them. If you remember, that bowl game is pretty ugly. They played Boston College. Actually ended up losing that one in a tight one. The offensive line. Now, if you could have found the money, not that SMU doesn't have the money, if they could have found a way to keep these kids from transferring to Missouri and Oklahoma, it would be all world, like one of the best in the group or in the Power 4 in general. It's still solid. You bring back 3 starters, and then you retool with a ton of transfers, right? So if they can find pieces and way to mesh that together, it'll be a good offensive line. And anytime you can block and give Preston Stone or Jennings time to get the ball to a guy like RJ Maryland, who is going to be a first team all ACC tight end in my side, I think he is awesome. I think him and Amari Niblack, he's a little bigger than Amari Niblack was at Alabama and now at Texas, but he is just as athletic in every single way. So I like the offense here. The defense is kind of one where it's going to have to really step up, because in places where they played high-powered offenses and better teams, like even a TCU last year, that's kind of where they faltered. But they were ranked very highly. If you look at every stat line, because they controlled the AAC last year, if they can find a way to really make that jump and just get a little bit better, it's going to be great for them. Like if they can rely on the defense to also get stops. The linebacking core, Kobe Wilson, Ahmad Walker, top tier of the ACC. Those guys will be really good. The corners is where I worry, right? And then when you get a schedule like ACC, you're going to have good corners, guys that can lock down some spots, maybe one side of the field, or just enough to not worry about them in coverage and always have to have somebody over the top, right? Let your linebackers run free. If they can get to the quarterback, it's going to be a lot of transfers, right? The defensive line brought in 8 transfers. The DBs are going to have to get more experience in that transfer thing. But it's gonna really depend on how far the DBs can take them to see how good this team can be, because I do worry about the inexperience on the back end there. And when you look at games like TCU last year, I think they lost by 17. Like that wasn't a great TCU team. I thought SMU was a better team, but they never really had a shot. They were kind of got controlled that whole time. Boston College got them in the bowl game with just about everybody playing there outside of Preston Stone. But I told you earlier, Kevin Jennings is a heck of a quarterback. I'd love to have him as a backup on my team for sure. For me, if you look at the schedule, I think there is a legitimate shot at 9-3. I think 8-4 might be a little more realistic. It's hard for me to pick them to maybe, win this conference or fight for it, but I think they'll be in the argument. They'll be in a lot of close games. It's just, can you stay healthy at quarterback A with Preston Stone? Can you make sure that the defense gels and that you have a good front so you don't just get gashed on the run? And then if you get gashed on the run, that just opens up everything on the back end, and inexperienced DBs, that's just not a recipe for success. So when I look at this, guys you really need to know, I think, on this team, in the running back room, I didn't even mention them talking about the offense. You have Jalen Knighton and LJ Johnson. Those are 2 guys who are very, very, very highly touted, guys that you can keep around and really work an offense around. And you have 2 guys like that, possibility of getting around 800 yards each. Maybe one guy goes over 1,000, one guy's close to it. But I'm super pumped to watch this SMU team here in 2024. I'm not sure where you guys' read is on them. Obviously, I have a little, just seeing it was cool, and all how excited they are to be in the ACC. I mean, they're not taking any TV money. They're just like, we'll pay our way into this conference and roll into it. So SMU should be a ton of fun. I think the coaching staff's in place. I think the quarterback's in place. Offense is good. Defense just needs a couple small things, revamped, and then they've got to be able to make the jump and handle a Power 4 schedule through an entire year.
Yeah, that's a lot of info, but good info. I think having 2 backs in the backfield is always such a plus for a team in a Power 4 conference, because it gets these schedules now, man, with how loaded these conferences are, it's going to be grueling on the body. I know the wear and tear system in college football 25 is fake, but it's really going to take effect when you're playing this dominant of opponents as often as these loaded conferences are. Jake, anything on SMU with their first year in the conference?
I think they're going to be ready. I really hope Preston Stone is healthy, because I think that's a guy who's maybe a top 5 quarterback in this conference when he's healthy. Transfer portal wise, They were right in the middle of the ACC, so I think they have bodies that are ready to play at this level, unlike a Cincinnati last year in the Big 12. And I was glancing at their schedule while you guys were talking. I mean, there's some tough spots. You get Florida State at Louisville to open up the year, but you have to go to at Stanford. You get Pitt at home. You get a rematch with Boston College at home, at Virginia, and Cal at home. It's not like they're playing Miami and NC State and a bunch of others. So
they miss
favorable.
Clemson, Clemson, Miami, NC State, and Virginia Tech. They get Florida State at home. They play TCU at home. They get Florida State at home, and the next week they're at Louisville. So it's a 3-game stretch. We're really going to know whether this team has a legitimate shot to fight for an ACC title berth.
I think they're ready to money-wise. They're bringing in some 4-star commits this last month over in June, and I think they're going to be 3 or 4 years down the road. That's probably one of the more prepared schools to take the Power 4 job.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And if you're a fan out of SMU, obviously it's a big year, and you probably need to load up on gear. Reese, where can you find a cool SMU hat?
I'm pretty sure if you go shopnorivals.com,
Bingo.
you can go look that stuff. They have an espresso collection hat just like this.
Mhm.
You can see this
You
little
get
bit
the
of style
pony
you'll
and
be-
brown. Is that what you're telling
Yeah,
me?
they got the pony and brown, just like that Mustang logo. It's a great hat, clean hat.
And use the code PTFS when you do so. But check out SMU. They are live on No Rivals right now. But all right, let's stick down to Reese as the SMU hats flashing up top. Let's stick down to Reese for Syracuse. Let's move down the list. This is Reese's team. So I expect a little bit of hype, a little bit of a pep in his step for this preview. But Reese, talk to us about the Orange in 2024. Probably the easiest schedule in college football.
Yeah, it's definitely up there. And I mean, I'm putting on my metaphorical fan hat for the first time ever with college football when it comes to this season. And this is a team where I've talked about it in previous episodes before, but this team has a new head coach and a new quarterback. So there's a little bit of optimism and hope there. But this is a team where they have a proven quarterback who comes from The Ohio State University, who just threw for over 3,100 yards last year, 24 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. Yeah, he was throwing to guys like Egbuka and Harrison, and he had Ryan Day as his head coach. A little bit different up here in Syracuse. He's got a new offensive coordinator this year in Jeff Nixon, which is his first year there. But the good thing that him and Fran Brown were able to do is they absolutely went to work in the portal and keeping guys around for this offense this year for Kyle to help him be successful. They bring back their top pass catcher, tight end Oronde Gadsden, who's actually number 2 tight end in NCAA football right now. If you look it up, 91 overall. They brought in a third teamer from Colorado State by the name of Justice Ross Simmons, and they brought in 2 transfers from Georgia that came with Fran by the name of Zeed Hayes and Jackson Meeks. So you're getting 2 SEC talents to be your wideouts at a school where they really haven't had that kind of hype around wide receivers for a while. And the big thing, too, is this program is slated to or projected to score over 30 points a game, which for this offense is not what they're used to. And they haven't had a quarterback throw for over 3,000 yards since 2012. So I think Kyle's going to fit into this offense and this scheme, whatever Nick's and Frank can figure it out. I think they're going to be just fine. But the big thing, too, is defensively, they bring back 8 starters, including all 3 of their linebackers from last year. But the big thing is they bring back their top tackler and a second-teamer ACC who had 110 tackles by the name of Marlo Wax. And then defensively, too, they're kind of switching up the schemes. They're going from a 3-4 to a 4-3 now. So they're going to look a little differently there, see what they can kind of figure out what they want to do. Because if this defense can find a way to just get a handful of stops a game, this offense, I think, is going to be set up just fine, especially when you talk about the schedule that they have. I think they can find a way to win. Their over-unders is 7.5 right now. You can get the over at plus money. And we talked about this earlier in the year, but this is one of my favorite overs, I think. This schedule just lines up for them, especially with being a new head coach. You look at their first 5 games. Georgia Tech is sneaky, but they open up with Ohio, then they get Georgia Tech at home, then they got a bye week, and they get Stanford, and then Holy Cross, and they go to UNLV. Those are 5 very winnable games. Yes, Georgia Tech will be tougher than I think that people give them credit for, but especially with the new head coach, if you can get wins early and get your players to buy in, I think the sky is the limit for these guys. So much to go do. And like I said, and you look at the problem they've had is the last couple of years is they start off hot the first 6 games, like they were 6-0 playing Clemson at home, and then Clemson went up there and did what they do. So they got to avoid the burning out at the end of the year where they start off 6-0 and they finish the year 6-7 or 7-6. They got to find a way to sustain success. But I mean, what better way for a new head coach to prove his success then with the schedule they have this year and to potentially bring in guys upcoming. I think if they got to take full advantage of this schedule, and I think Fran could have a very successful start to his career up here, especially when you go and get the names that you got in the portal for a Syracuse football team that really has been as successful in the past couple of years.
Yeah, I do not think that there is a more beneficial piece to your first year as a head coach at a program than having a good schedule, not starting off with a really good group of 5 school or a halfway decent Power 4 school. Like starting with what he's got, the expectations got to be little higher than most first year coaches. No, would you say, JP, or what do you have on the Orange?
Yeah, it's 100% that way. My worry is if he has a really good year this year and then they get a bad schedule next, if you're not building it correctly or given the proper amount of time, it might kind of turn that seat a little hotter than it needs to be for unnecessary reasons. Just what we've seen in college football. I hope Syracuse gives them the time to build. The offensive line for me is just keep McCord upright and keep him in the game, right? Like just keep him upright, keep him in the game. That'll go a long ways in helping them really grow as an offense.
Yeah, that would be very important. Anything, Jake, on Syracuse this year?
I think just mentioning like the defensive transition to the 4-2-5 or the 4-3, getting Fadil Diggs from Texas A&M is going to be massive for them to help Fran Brown get pressure on the quarterback. So, yeah, I thought he did a really nice job in the portal, and 4 home games to start the year against Ohio, big. Georgia Tech, Stanford, and Holy Cross that's an opportunity. That is definitely an opportunity.
And maybe their name will pop up later in our conclusion to the episode when we ask maybe surprising teams or disappointing teams. Who knows? But all right, there's Syracuse in 2024. I'm going to keep it moving down the line. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Clemson. Clemson is obviously a very highly touted program and has been the talk of the town during the offseason because they have a head coach that really doesn't use the portal. He says that their players in the portal just simply are not good enough to play for his program, which seems okay when you think of Dabo Swinney as a whole. But when you look at their season in 2023, where granted they still won 9 games, but you went 4-4 in the ACC, really, as a Clemson fan, you probably feel like you had a down year. I don't know. I feel like maybe you want some action in the transfer portal. There's probably some players that you can replace, especially when you have a Heisman candidate going into the 23 season, Cade Klubnik, who I don't want to say shits the bed because he was fine. 19 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. You return him back this year. I think he's going to benefit from not being in the national spotlight, having that Heisman hanging over his head. Like, he's still a very good player, but I think the star of the show, that's kind of a newer face, Shipley, goes out. They bring in Phil Maffa. I think Phil Maffa could be a really good back in this league. He had a good season last year. He almost put up 1,000 yards. He had 8 or 9 touchdowns. He's going to make a big impact on this offense. Speaking of the offense in a whole, you return 8 starters in your second-year offensive coordinator under Garrett Riley, who was really expected to blow up last year. I think they thought this team was going to be more of a spread them out, highly touted offense that puts up a bunch of points, and they really just weren't that. They're the 50th offense nationally in yards per game, and that's not on standard for Garrett Riley. He really is a guy that puts up points in his time at TCU. They were that offense. So I think letting him open it up this year is going to be very important. You return, like I said, Phil Maffa, who is going to be the main key in this offense. You return 4 of 5 on the offensive line. So that's why I think that those two meshing well together will be super important, because you have a very young wide receiver room. You have Antonio Williams, who's a sophomore, and Bryant Waisco, who's a freshman. Klubnik's got to really rely on these guys to make some plays and take the pressure off Maffa, and that's really the only way I see Clemson having more sustainable success throughout the year on offense. On defense, you lose a ton. You bring back 2 guys that you retain that could have gone to the draft that were pretty good. You bring back Barrett Carter at 67 tackles and 3.5 sacks last year, and then you bring back R.J. Mickens, who's a good player. He had 50 tackles, but you lose literally everybody else and a majority to the NFL. That's expected when you had a top 10 defense nationally and you had a top 20 passing defense, but they really got to make some replacements in the secondary. They didn't do well in the transfer portal, as I already talked about, but the defense is pretty much what Clemson has run their, I can say, dynasty comfortably, I think, on. I think defense is very important for this team to find success this year. The schedule is what scares me the most. Just to wrap all this up, I think the schedule is the most terrifying part for this team. You open up with Georgia at a neutral site. They want to say neutral site. It's in Atlanta. So it's going to be a Georgia home game. ETN won't play the first half, but then you host App State. That's nothing to blink at. You get Florida State on the road. So I really don't know. Like these big games that Clemson feel like they fell in last year to Duke to open the year, then that kind of teeters their season one way. They're going to be very important. You open up with Georgia, you got to probably chalk that up as a loss, no? So building off of that, maybe getting a good App State team at home, then you move on from there. But I really just, there's a little bit of question marks, and I think the main key for everything is Klubnik's consistency. He struggled with his consistency last year. It was more of a roller coaster, and if they can figure that out, they'll beat Clemson. All right, Jake, anything on the Tigers in 2024?
Yeah, it's the freshman for me. Like TJ Moore, the 5-star wide receiver, Bryant Wesco, another freshman coming in. Can those two, that's been like the handicap for this Clemson offense recently is the receiving position. They need some playmakers. Can those guys be DeAndre Hopkins, like Sammy Watkins? Like they're looking at these guys like the next up and comers. They've been waiting for a really talented receiver to go in Clemson again. And then on defensively, you get Sammy Brown to go with Barrett Carter. Can he go under Barrett Carter's wing? Another 5-star linebacker for them. That defense is going to be really young, but I trust the defense under Dabo all the time, whether it's Brett Venables being defensive coordinator, whoever it is. I trust Dabo and who he's got in that spot in that defense, but got to see the receivers and what they can turn out to be.
Yeah, and they have a young D line too. They, like I said, they lost 9 of the 11 starters, but I think Peter Woods and TJ Parker can maybe fill that void. Reese, you talk about Clemson quite a bit. You were a big Klubnik guy late last year or early in the year last year. What do you think on them in 2024?
Yeah, this was a team that I picked to go to the college football playoff. What a great pick out of me last year. But I just think it was, I mean, you have the new incoming offensive coordinator who just came from TCU, and you know that the hype was there, and I think it was just kind of growing pains in that first year to see what they could figure out. But yeah, it's just roller coaster. It's just how can you be consistent? Because when you get consistent quarterback play, granted you also had Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, but like those, and then to go to DJU who is very inconsistent. But like if you can get consistent play at that school, usually that team can be pretty competent, successful, and be around the conversation at the end of the year. So it goes to show quarterback's most important position, I think, in all of sports. And if this guy can somewhat be just competent with this offense, I think they can be just fine this year.
I should mention before we move to the next team, Clemson is also available on No Rivals. The 2 ACC teams, Clemson is the second one. I flipped hats. If you saw, right as we talked after SMU, I was like, wait a second, I have one of those. They have this version in Clemson as well. So check them out. ShopNoRivals.com. Use the code PTFS. Shout out No Rivals. We appreciate you. But all right, there is Clemson. Let's move back up the list. We're going to go back to Jake, and Jake is going to talk to us about probably one of the more exciting teams for this year. I feel like they win a few offseason national championships this year for good reason, but tell us about the Miami Hurricanes in 2024.
Yeah, is it exciting or is it interesting? That's really the key word when I look at Miami, because the offseason, I think, never disappoints, especially under Mario Cristobal. You know, he's always going to recruit at a high level, whether it be the high school ranks or the transfer portal. We're going to talk about both. But I am bullish on this football team. I'm really excited to see what they can do. But it's kind of a put up or shut up year for Cristobal. I really think that. And last year, there was 2 teams in the country that ranked both top 40 in offense and defense. One was Miami and one was Texas A&M. The one thing those two had in common, being in the top 40, is that they didn't win 8 games. There was only 2 teams that didn't do that. So statistically, very productive. But Tyler Van Dyke is also a problem with a lot of turnover issues on offense, and that's got to clean up. Who better to bring in right now than Cam Ward? Not the highest rated transfer portal yet, but one of the more, big names, and probably one of the bigger paid transfer portal gets in this conference. So I'm really excited to see what Cam Ward can do. Is this finally the quarterback in Miami that can take them over the hump? We'll have to wait and see. It's just, he starts off so fast. We always love to talk about Cam Ward in September, little October. Then we'll see what happens in November this year. The skill positions are absolutely loaded. I'm fascinated with this offense. Yeah, running back Damian Martinez, who comes over from Oregon State, the Pac-12 Freshman of the Year a couple of years ago, was really, really good. You have wide receiver Xavier Restrepo. Everybody knows that name. It seems like he's been around the block for a little bit. That's a steady guy that Cam Ward can rely on. And then they bring in wide receiver Sam Brown. He was a 4-star transfer from Houston. He was probably their number one option, but definitely a number two, a guy who had over 600 yards last year. He's going to be good for them, and they needed to get him because Colby Young, a good receiver for them, goes to Georgia. So they kind of replace a guy who they needed to fill in that spot. Offensive line might be the best in the ACC. Francis Mauigoa was a freshman All-American last year. He's going to be a first-round draft pick, maybe even a top 10 draft pick when he's finally eligible. He's going to anchor that offensive line, so learn the name now if you haven't already. His brother, Francisco Mauigoa, a stud on defense. Let's go to the defensive side of the ball. Ruben Bain Jr., those are two names with Mauigoa and Ruben Bain Jr. that are going to get after the quarterback this year, which is going to help the secondary because the secondary is pretty new with some faces. Again, they kind of went to the portal to plug and play some guys in the secondary. I would rather rely on familiarity at the defensive line than I would with the secondary, because if there's one thing I know with Ruben Bain Jr. and the rest of that defensive line in Miami, it's going to get after the quarterback. So you could probably have me at corner out there. They're going to still help me out, and they're going to rush that quarterback to get the ball off. So I feel good with where this defense is at, and I could list the names on and on that offense. It's really star-studded. Like I said, we've always seen talented Mario Cristobal teams. Can this finally be the year? I think it's no better time than now in a 12-team playoff. This is your time to go get it. You don't have to win the conference, but we got to get, I would say 10 wins probably gets you in. So I would like to see it. I'm not a Miami hater.
I should be, probably based on my team's history with Miami, but I think they're so exciting. I think I used the right verbiage to start
this.
It's
good for college football. I think it's good.
Yeah,
They're
very good point.
And the ACC needs a little bit more fire at the top, I would say. Yep. And I think people agree, especially with the two that are worded to be on their way out. It would be very helpful for college football for Miami to have a good season. I love the talent that they have. This is a pro Cam Ward podcast. It has been since his Washington State days. So if it's your first time here, we always talk Cam Ward. He got our player of the week last year, week 1, but we love him.
JP, Cam Ward, if you're here, we love you.
That is true. Yeah, Cam Ward. If
you're here, Cam Ward.
Come on,
thanks for listening, Cam.
I'll send you the link. Just let us know. But JP, you did just a little bit due to internet signals. You're back. What do you think on Miami in 2024?
Prove it. That's all. I mean, that's where I'm at with this team. I've read enough. I don't know.
Kneel it and prove
I've read enough on Miami and heard enough about them that I just need to see it at this point.
Yep.
I think that's a fair place to put them. I think my fandom always comes out in me saying I'm in the same spot. So I get it. Shout out to Miami fans. If you're still sticking around, there's not many of you, but maybe you'll fill that stadium one day. All right. Moving down the line, JP's back in time to take his team. And that is another new member. But JP is here to talk on the Golden Bears. Tell us about Cal in 2024.
Cal, if you think about Cal when they were in the Pac-12, it was very much a defensive thing, right? They played really good defense. The offense was kind of suspect. It was a slower moving school. That has not been the case last year, and it's not going to be the case this year at all. Head coach Justin Wilcox bringing a new offensive coordinator, Mike Blesh. Blesh is going to have quite the quarterback battle to deal with right now. He brings back the guy that got a lot of snaps late in the year, and Fernando Mendoza. He also brings in a transfer in Chandler Rogers from North Texas. If you remember Chandler Rogers and kind of what he's done, he really ran some high-flying offenses in North Texas over the last couple of years. They're going to I think they'll be one of the better offenses in the conference. The worry is on the defensive side, and if Wilcox can get that back to where it was prior to the last couple of years. If they can get to a solid level, this team has a good shot at easily getting to a bowl game and maybe even pushing 8-9 wins. When you look at this team on the offensive side, a lot of the production that is there is in the quarterback room, and then it comes in Jaden Ott, a guy who is one of the best running backs in the country. If you hadn't heard the name, I'm surprised you haven't heard it by now. You're going to hear it a lot as we get closer to the year, and they talk more ACC and preseason All-American list, preseason All-ACC list. He'll be one that shows up just about every single time. The production on the receiver side is going to come from the transfer portal, and they've got to hit on a couple of these. If they don't, they'll be in a weird spot right here. You bring in a couple guys like Tobias Merriweather, from Notre Dame. Solid last year, not a big play guy, didn't really, blow the roof off anything, but he's solid. He's a guy that you can throw the football to and rely on that side. Mikey Matthews from Utah. Again, we saw Utah's offense last year. It wasn't like he was game-breaking or anything. Jonathan Brady from New Mexico State. New Mexico State wiped that roster. It's gone completely. This is where one of the receivers ended up that Pavia had a season ago. So we could really, really work to get a big play guy, get a true number one receiver, get a guy in the slot that really helps you out. Good news is your check down option and a guy who's a freshman All-American last year, Jack Andrews. He is your All-American tight end. If you got a good tight end and you find a way to get them the football, it really helps really create matchups on the outside. If this guy is open all the time, if you can get away from just running the ball with Jay Knott and worrying about keeping whoever plays quarterback this year upright, if we can find a way to hit a guy 1-2 reads in, I think it'll really help this Cal offense, who I do see being really high flying. Defensively, it's going to have to be done in the portal again. They're bringing in Marcus Harris, an Idaho transfer. He was FCS All-American a season ago. He'll play DB. And then one that I'm excited about, and I think they are as well in Berkeley, is Liam Johnson, a transfer from Princeton. This kid was all Ivy League a season ago. He's built to play Power 4 football. He's not going to come in undersized or anything. I think he's ready to go as well. I really think if you look at the defense, though, there are returning starters. It's can you get returning starters to grow and get better, bring more talent in for them? That's really where I'm at on everything. Linebacker, Cade, now hang with me on the name here, Uvale. It was all conference last year. He's going to be your best defensive player right there. Offensive line, Victor Stoffel. You bring in a guy like Rush Reimer from Montana State. Those are two transfers that should shore up your offensive line. The defense will be held down by those guys I was just talking about, but we need to hit on a couple of them a little more than what you're expecting. I think you look at Cal and you look at the schedule, and I think there's some tough games on here. I mean, you go to Auburn, that's not always easy. San Diego State might be a little sneakier than you think with the new Sean Lewis look. You get Miami, you get NC State, but you don't get SMU to the end of the year. I think this win total sits at 6. I look at 7 or 8 for this Cal team. I think they're going to be a little better than people expect, and they'll definitely sneak up on some teams on a weaker ACC schedule. So if Justin Wilcox wants to get back on schedule with a good defense and winning football games in a school that doesn't really love football, to be honest with you, and that's like the school itself, not necessarily the fan base, although I'm sure the fan base isn't too rabid either. This is a great year to do that. If you can get another step up and keep Jay Knott, like the fact that you kept him on campus is massive. After the portal that we saw in December, keep him on campus, find out who you want to play quarterback. Don't do the whole, 2 quarterback dance. I think that struggles for teams to really find their footing. It'll be a ton of fun. So I'm pumped to watch Cal here in 2024.
Cal will be a fun one to watch. I thought they had, and you talked about it, but that offensive firepower that they just came out randomly with last year was such a fun thing to just flip on the TV midday and Cal was scoring points. That was a guarantee. Jake, you have anything on the Golden Bears going into 2024, trying to make a little bit of a statement in the ACC?
Yeah, as a de facto Notre Dame fan, I think I want to see Tobias Merriweather take that next step because I think inconsistency was his problem last year. He made enough plays. He could have been a number one option for them, but he just couldn't put it together, and he got kind of pushed out by that Chris Mitchell who transferred in from FIU and some others. So, I think I agree with JP. Stick with a quarterback. I was a little confused with bringing in Rodgers when you have Mendoza, but with Blush, they have him and Rodgers have that connection from North Texas. So going to be interesting to see where he kind of sides when he's calling plays, but I'm not a big 2 quarterback person myself.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think I was just quickly on the quarterback room from reading kind of what they have on their team websites and kind of some of their shows. I think the Mendoza thing is we want him to grow a little more, and then Rodgers is more of a he'll get us over the hill.
Yeah.
Let's hit
He's
the bridge.
3,000-yard passer
because the kid is talented. Mendoza's talented, but maybe he needs a little more time in the oven to really grow into something they're hoping for. So,
all right, there's Cal in 2024. Moving down the line, we're going back to Reese. Reese, tell us about North Carolina. This is a team with some question marks around them, but tell us a little bit in depth about the Tar Heels in 24.
Yeah, well, you're going to Chapel Hill, and I think the big thing with this team, out goes your Heisman candidate Drake May, and in comes your new quarterback Max Johnson. He's got 22 starts between his 2 years at LSU and A&M, and what better way to help out a brand new quarterback with your system than bringing back your top running back from last year? They bring back Omarion Hampton, who is the number 22 overall player right now in NCAA football, 93 overall. He led the ACC in rushing last year with over 1,500 yards and had 6 straight games of over 100 yards rushing. So what better way to help out a quarterback in a potential passing game than bringing back one of your top running backs in the country. And then Mac Brown also has a lot of faith in his wide receiver room. They were able to bring back Nate McCollum and J.J. Jones, as well as their top tight end, Bryson Nesbitt, who was a Mackey finalist last year. So he's got a lot of weapons around him to be successful with this offense. And then defensively, they have a new defensive coordinator finally. The big thing I think with him is what is he going to be able to do with that defensive line, who has just underperformed the last couple of years. And not to mention this defense has given up over 400 yards per game the last 2 seasons as well. And last year they gave up 260 yards a game through the air and a 62% completion percentage. They did bring in 2 defensive back transfers to kind of help out with that, a little bit more experience. But in the linebacker group, they're a little more inexperienced as they lose their top 2 guys from last year. So a lot of question marks surrounding that defense, as is kind of on par with this team for the last couple of years. But when you dive into their schedule, their non-conference, it's winnable, but it's also pretty interesting because they open up at Minnesota, and then week 4 they get James Madison, who is not the James Madison of Kurt Cignetti that we knew from last year, but it's still going to be a challenging game, I think, for this team going in. And then week 2 you get Charlotte, week 3 you get NC Central, so it doesn't really matter. But then when it comes to the conference schedule, you get Florida State on the road for week 10, and you end the year with NC State at home. And then everybody else they get in the conference is kind of middle of the pack. So I think that's really going to – I think that offense is going to be there because I trust Mac Brown, and I trust all the weapons that are around Max Johnson. And he did have some success at A&M last year. But it's going to be, what is that defense going to be able to do to try to keep them relevant and into these games, especially with the new defensive coordinator, with all the question marks they have. Amari Campbell is the linebacker they had a big spring camp. They said they have a lot of faith in him to step in and kind of fill in those shoes from those linebackers who left. But I think that defense is kind of the biggest question mark because they do have a favorable schedule, I want to say, for this team. Like I said, number 6 on overall strength of schedule for the FBS. So I think that's what they got to worry about this year.
Yeah, sometimes when I hear North Carolina, are you guys, this is just a kind of not off topic, but a little bit lighter of a question. Are you guys still shocked that Mac Brown's still coaching? I feel like if you're going to go out, maybe with your Heisman contending quarterback is a good way to go out.
He's got like 1 or 2 more is my gut.
Yeah, that's probably a fair timeline to put on him. But Jake, what do you think about this squad? Do you think they can make the replacement? Do you think Max Johnson can step into those shoes?
You can rely on the offense. Apparently, he just wants to bring in former head coaches to be his defensive coordinators. Jeff Collins comes in. If I'm Collins, like, start with the defensive line. Defensive line's got to be a game changer for them. Otherwise, they're just going to, get in these shootouts and lose dumb games like they always kind of do when they're 6-0, and then they lose to Georgia Tech at home or whatever it is. North Carolina always seems to find themselves in one of those spots.
That is a fair way to estimate the Tar Heels to go about their season. JP, what do you think? I think you got a little bit of fandom in there for North Carolina. You own some gear, but what do you think on their season?
He's a North Carolina basketball fan.
I am not. I'm just I was one of those kids who thought he was a North Carolina fan.
That's all of us when we were younger.
This team seems, I don't know. I don't not to like be blank and frank about everything, like mid, like they're middle of the pack. I don't see them.
That's how they are.
I don't
over under 7.5.
They won't be too bad. They won't be too good. They'll just be right in the middle of the ACC, an average football team this year. Max Johnson, I think, is interesting. I think he's a better quarterback than people give him credit for. So I am excited to see if he can really.
I thought you were about to say that he was better than Drake May. Yeah, I thought so too. I just snapped my head over for
this. Jordan.
Go back and watch Drake May make that team good last year. It's ridiculous what he did for them.
He was absolutely elite. But all right, there's North Carolina in 2024. I'm going to move it down the line, and I get to talk about one of my, I definitely would say de facto teams, a team that I made one of my bold predictions on last year in Georgia Tech. They get bowl eligible just like I thought they would. They're in their second year under head coach Brent Key, who I think is a better coach than given credit for. He's 11-10 over his 2 years, 1+ because he took over as an interim coach, and they had a few ranked wins under his belt. You might need to put an asterisk next to their win against Miami last year. We just talked about it earlier after we broke down Cristobal's awful decision to not kneel the ball. But they went 7-6 overall. I think the most important piece for Georgia Tech fans is you just want to keep seeing this development as you're rebuilding with only a second-year head coach. And a big piece of that's going to be returning Haynes King. Haynes King was 95% of your offense last year, but you also had a really good ground game. I don't think people give Jamal Hayes Haynes enough credit. He rushed for 1,000 yards. I think this offense overall was absolute firepower, especially within the games that they won. You returned both your leading receivers in Malik Rutherford and Eric Singleton Jr. So you have all the pieces back, but you return 8 of 11 on the offensive side of the ball, including another school that brings back 4 of 5 offensive linemen. So you have to have high expectations, at least on the offensive side of the ball for this year. I think the schedule is a little scary when you think about their offense because every FBS team on their schedule qualified for a bowl or more last year. So you don't have the easiest path to have another successful season or get to a bowl. I kind of expect them to because they did it last year and they retained so much on offense, but their defense struggled at times last year, man. Let's look at what they did. They averaged 221 yards per a game. They gave them up on the ground. They gave up 220 yards a game. What do? You bring in a new defensive coordinator and he brings in 3 new assistants to try and revamp things in Santucci. And I think that they can do so. They didn't bring in a ton of, I don't want to say jump off the page transfers, but they got a few pieces here and there. They did return their leading tackler in Kyle Efford. And I think that may be the piece that gets them bowl eligible. But this is another team that I feel like we can classify within that North Carolina, JP, I'll quote you, mid-range. I just don't think that they're going to have they don't have enough development yet to get to that point where they're competing at the top once again. But you end last season competing with a Georgia team in a rivalry game, so you have to feel good about things. Haynes King, we mentioned him, but let me put it in perspective for you. He threw for over 2,800 yards. He ran for over 800 yards, and he was accounted for in some way, shape, or form 37 total touchdowns last year. So you got to feel like the offense is going to be there, and the question mark just lies on that defense. Can the new guys in the new room, in the new system, make up for what you lost last year? Because when you did lose, you gave up a ton of points, and they were brutal on the ground throughout the season, as I mentioned. So that's pretty much the look I have on Georgia Tech this year. I do think they get bowl eligible. Again, you can quote me now. I'll go back-to-back years on that prediction. But it's a school that I do look to make gigantic steps forward here in the future. I really think Brent Key's the guy, and he can get it done at his alma mater. JP, do you agree? You think Georgia Tech's going to be mid this year, or do you think they're going to go a little maybe disappointing-wise?
I think they can improve and still lose more games than they did last year. That's the problem.
The schedule's tough.
Yeah.
I think
that's the problem. I think Haynes King is a solid quarterback. I think he led the ACC in pass yards a season ago. Just turned the ball over a ton. He's going to be a gunslinger. Let him be a gunslinger. If you want to have this offense that's high flying, let him be who he is. Now, obviously, you want the turnovers to turn down a little bit, but you can kind of live with what he is as a quarterback. He's uniquely himself. Just the schedule does not work for this team to grow in wins. It can grow in talent, a little more experience. Maybe you feel like you're a better team. It's tough for me to say they're going to have more wins, though.
Yeah, and that's fair, especially when you open up with Florida State, as Jake talked about earlier. That's not always the easiest way to open a season against the best team in your conference. Jake, what do you think? Do you think Georgia Tech is going to get bowl eligible? That would be my question.
I don't. I like Key.
Wow.
I like the receivers. I like the offense. Defense ranked 120th in total defense last year. I think it was the worst in Power 5 against the run, like you mentioned, Parks. And then, let's quickly glance over the schedule. You have Florida State to open up. You don't get any
Syracuse week 2. Don't forget that.
Games at home. Yeah, you're going at Syracuse, at Louisville, at North Carolina, at Virginia Tech. Like, you can't get any of those guys at home. And then when you are at home, you get Notre Dame, you get Miami, NC State, you travel to Georgia. It's like they get Georgia State, VMI, and Duke. I mean, those are probably 3 wins you should have. And then the rest, it's like, whoa. You're going to be favored.
But all those teams, VMI, no, but like Georgia State and Duke, both teams that played in bowl games last year. Duke's probably a little bit less, in my opinion. I think Georgia State could win. No, they could win that game.
They got a coaching change, and they're gonna be rough this year, I think. But
I think they were good at running the ball, though, and that's all you got to do.
Battle for Atlanta.
Last year anyway, but it also is a tough scene. Reese, I'll go to you on this, but it's a tough scene when you draw the rivalry bid of playing Georgia. That's not easy either.
Fun,
at least you're not Oregon State. Like, you get the number 1 team in the country. So that absolutely.
Like Kirby Smart.
Yeah, nobody wants to do that right now, including me. But all right, there is Georgia Tech. Let's go back up to the top. Jake is going to take us through Louisville. Jake, tell us about the Cards in 2024. Can Jeff Brom's squad put another ACC title run together?
I think I've come around on Brom. I think these teams will always be fun. Will they be legitimate? Will they be at the top of the conference? It's kind of a wait and see for me. I think they'll be in the top half, but I don't know if they're on the same talent level as your Clemsons, your Florida State, and maybe your Miami, to be honest with you. With Jeff Brom, you know that you're going to have a high-flying offense, and now that the transfer portal exists, you know you're going to have a ton of transfers in and out every single year. 31 new transfers. Multiple transfers came in the winter cycle and then left in the spring window, including Penny Boone, Tyler Barron. Those were guys who were 4-star transfers who went in. So that makes me question, like, what's kind of going on there? How do you kind of lose those top 100 recruits? Are you not paying enough? You got them in the first place. It's just like, it's a little confusing on how you can't retain through the spring practice. So it makes me think what's going on there. Another transfer that comes in, quarterback. You're going to know this name. He's been around for 7 years, and he did say that this is his last year. Tyler Shuck comes in from Texas Tech, the former Oregon quarterback as well. I think he's a good replaceable guy. They had Plummer last year, correct? Is that who replaced them? He was good under Brom. Again, reuniting. I think Shuck will be productive again as long as he can stay healthy. Colin Lacey comes in from South Alabama, where he had 1,300 yards last year. He replaces Jamari Thrash, who was that Georgia State transfer who came in last year and thrived under Brom's offense. I like that. That's a good, I don't know if it's an upgrade, but it's definitely a plug and play. You're going to keep that same production. That was a good pickup. Ja'Cory Brooks, a 4-star transfer from Alabama, comes in at receiver. And then you get Chris Bell back, who was your second leading receiver last year. So like I said, you got a familiar quarterback. I think you got some good receivers. Louisville's going to be fun to watch. They're going to throw it around. It's going to be good. It's going to be exciting. Defensively, 7 returning starters. I think that when you associate a Jeff Brom team, you don't necessarily think defense, but they were solid last year, ranked 21st in total defense. The secondary is probably going to be their best group. It's going to be more familiar in starters, but it's also going to be highlighted by defensive end Ashton Gelati. I think that's going to be a first team, second team, all conference defensive end. This conference is loaded with edge rushers too. I've noticed kind of going through this, which makes it exciting too. Louisville, I think they can get back to 8 or 9 wins. But this is not a team right now that we had them as a dark horse with their, do you guys remember that was like the offseason topic of the year last year was going through their schedule. They're like Brom's first year loaded with studs. They got to take advantage of the schedule. And they pretty much did. They got to the conference title. I don't think they're going to take advantage of that this year, but I still think they're going to be a solid ACC team.
Yeah, I definitely think that. I just think Jeff Brom is one of those guys that always gets the most out of the group he's got. Kind of like a Pat Fitzgerald, where they're gonna compete no matter whether or not they have names that jump off the page, but they do have a few names like that. And it's a revolving door. It's a Dion level revolving door at Louisville. They did it in both windows. So that was absolutely shocking. JP, what do you think about the Cards?
I just want to see Tyler Shuck in this offense, and I want to see how much better he could be than Plummer. I think that's the hope with grabbing him, is that he's a bridge guy, but he'll be better than what you had a season ago. I don't think the playmakers are as talented around, which hurts a ton, because you look at what Jawar Jordan and Jamari Thrash did for this team last year. I mean, it was unreal. Go watch the Notre Dame game and how they ate that defense alive. It'll be interesting to see. I don't know where I see them and where they fit quite yet, but I'm hopeful the defense is solid, and I'm hopeful Shuck is better, because I think if you're Louisville, just be really good and then beat Kentucky at the end of the year. Get that out of the way. You don't have to worry about that anymore. And I think people will be happier than you think. Even with 8 wins or 7 wins, I think people will be happier than you think if they get Kentucky.
Reese, anything on the Cards in 2024 that jumps out to you?
I got a little bit on them later, but yeah, if their quarterback can stay healthy, I think there's a lot of upside for them. But if he's not, which he's had issues in the past, I just don't know how much faith with how much guys you kind of have that revolving door. If you can't have a quarterback that's going to stay healthy, I just think it's going to be an issue.
I like that. A little teaser for later, which we will get into all the fun stuff at the end, players to watch, surprising team, disappointing teams, and hot takes if we have them. But moving down the line, let's go to the next team. We're going back to JP, who's going to talk about, I'm going to say definitely one of your de facto teams, or at least a brand. Tell us about NC State in 2024 and what we can expect from the Wolfpack.
Hey, always great to cover Dave Doran, the former Drake Bulldog. So a little Des Moines connection there, I think. you talk about Jeff Brom always getting the most out of his teams. Dave Doran's done an unreal job at NC State and finds his way like sneaking onto top head coaches list, maybe around like the 18 to 25 range usually. You look at last year, they brought in Brennan Armstrong and they thought that was going to fix a lot of the problems. Second year now with offensive coordinator Robert Ernai. Here's the one thing that I want to really emphasize is the media group, the school, the program, and the coaches are pumped to have Grayson McCall on campus right now. They think he is legitimately going to be that answer to this offense. And I kind of agree with them in some spots. Grayson McCall, you look back at 2020, 2021, and what he did at Coastal, very solid. The last couple of years, he's kind of dealt with some injury issues. Ever since Jamie Chadwell left Coastal, it wasn't the same kind of Coastal offense. And he wasn't putting up the same numbers, but he's a guy who's not going to turn it over. He runs the offense super smooth. Everybody seems to love him. He seems to be a great glue guy to keep everybody together. Here's another thing that is flying under the radar. Duke's leading rusher from a season ago, Jordan Waters, comes into NC State. Now they got a really good back too to help Grayson McCall. I'm pumped to watch this. This is usually a defensive identity type team, but I think the offense is going to be the focal point this year and a lot of what carries them. Defensively, let's kind of talk about that and why I kind of am a little more skeptical on it. The front seven of the defense, it's going to need some guys to step up. I mean, you do have a guy named Davin Vaughn. I just want to say Davin, right? I was going to say Davin Vaughn on the interior, who's a really good defensive end. And he's going to kind of power everything. They need to stay healthy. They need to stay very confident in a young group of corners. That's going to be kind of the make or break point for this team. I think I've had a couple teams here where I'm talking about the defensive backs, and it's got to be get them healthy, get them comfortable, and get them confident. Otherwise, you're going to kind of run into some rough spots here. Another thing with NC State here, Dave Doran's known for the defensive side of the ball. So I think he can kind of work his magic and get these guys in places that they can succeed because it's always been a team that's been good at it. Peyton Wilson's gone. I think that's going to be a lot of the headlines you read is just how do you replace a guy with over 100 tackles in the last 4 years? The answer is you don't. You find a way to make sure people are set up for success so you're not worried about losing the guy of that caliber on the defense. Now, another thing to kind of look at this, right? Jahad Carter and Aiden White on the DBs that I was talking about, those are two transfers that have come in. I think they fit pretty well into what they're trying to do here. So it may not be the defensive identity that we're used to seeing with NC State. It may be an offense that's really talented, and I think they're talented on the outside. Casey Concepcion is an all-world guy. He'll be all ACC probably, possibly an All-American in some spots. You got a weapon on the outside, a true number one receiver. You have a legitimate number one back in Belcow and Jordan Waters, and now you think you have the quarterback. It is time to get after things if you are NC State. Schedule-wise, it lines up. And we're going to know early, I think, how good this team is. The beautiful thing about this week 2 game with Tennessee is that you're going to know a lot about Tennessee. You're going to learn a lot about North Carolina State. And those are two teams people has dark horses maybe to win their conference in some spots. But it's not that tough. Clemson at Clemson early. You also missed Florida State, Miami, Louisville, and SMU. I mean, that's pretty nice in the ACC, right? Like you're 4 of your top 5 teams that win the conference outside of yourself on your schedule. I think we're pumped to see. So I'm pumped to watch this team in 2024. Never 10 wins, I believe, in their history. They've never touched the 10-win mark. Dave Doran, you got a real shot to do it here. I'm cheering for a guy that went to school and played some college ball in Des Moines. So, and we liked Grayson McCall. I mean, if you go back to 2020, before we even play the fight song, like Grayson McCall was a guy we turned the TV on and like, look at this kid throw the football around the yard. Really fun coastal offense. Now he gets the chance to do it with, could you say, I think almost better? Like it's not Isaiah Likely and some of the guys that had a coastal, but I think Casey Concepcion could turn into a better collegiate player, and Jordan Waters is definitely a better back than what they had. So pumped to watch him.
I'm also excited to see McCall against better talent more consistently because I think he is that level. And it was almost shocking he was at Coastal as long as he was. Granted, I don't think that's a school that's easy to leave because of the amenities around it that you get to enjoy. But I'm 100% excited to see Grayson McCall in a different uniform and see how he plays in a Power 4 conference. Jake, what do you think about the Wolfpack?
I really like the offense. Noah Rogers, they bring in from Ohio State, a receiver. Like, this is going to be a solid team. You bring in Jordan Waters, fantastic home run transfer pickup. And I trust Tony Gibson, the defensive coordinator. I know we talked about losing Peyton Wilson and some other faces, but I would rather have a bunch of talent if I'm Dave Doran's team on offense and a guy we can trust in Grayson McCall than you just let defensive coordinator Tony Gibson just hey, you take care of it. It doesn't even matter who you have personnel wise.
Yeah. One correction thing. I looped in Aiden White with the transfers. Didn't mean to loop him into the transfer. I just wanted to say he is a returner from that team last year. And then they bring in transfers like Jahad Carter to really shore up the back end. So just want to clarify that. This is a team that picked off 17 passes last year. So if they can get 9 or 10,
all right, there is NC State in 2024. Let's move it down the line as we have a bunch of more teams to cover, but we're going to squeeze them all into one towards the end. Like I told you, a little preview there, but we're going down to Reese. Reese is going to cover Pitt. Reese, tell us about the Panthers in 2024 and what we can expect from them.
So Pitt opens up this year. Win total is sitting at 5.5 right now. It's Pat Narduzzi's 10th year. They're trying to reclaim that success they had a couple years ago with Kenny Pickett. They really struggled last year. They went 3-9. And they're going to have a little bit of a quarterback battle this year between Nate Yarnell, and then they bring in a Bama transfer by the name of Eli Holstein. And they also have a new offensive coordinator this year to kind of help up that offense. He goes a little bit of quicker tempo, and he does bring back some weapons as well. He brings back a 3-year starter in the backfield by the name of Rodney Hammond. Their number 2 pass catcher from last year, and also their top tight end again, Gavin Bartholomew. And they also brought in 2 transfers from Western Carolina, their top 2 receivers as well. So they're kind of giving some more weapons around to figure out what they're going to do with that offense and see what Cade Bell can do with these guys. But then defensively, this is a team that only brings back 4 starters in the entire defense, which is a problem. It's a lot of questions. But this is a defense that is really known what Pitt is known for. The last 4 years, up until last year, they had 31. The previous 4 years before that, they notched up 45 plus sacks in 4 straight seasons. So they're confident they can get these guys back in there. Their defensive coordinator, Randy Bates, is his 7th year there. He feels like he has a strong group of guys there that can kind of return to that success, because if you can put pressure on the quarterback, then all the guys that are around you that are newer, you can find a way to get that quarterback uncomfortable, maybe make some errant throws, let guys get bigger plays, build some confidence. So they're confident that defensive line can kind of get back to their success they used to have. But then when you dive into their schedule, I think when you look at it, the biggest thing you're going to find out about this team is when they have the backyard brawl in week 3. They get West Virginia at home. And they lost this game last. This is a game where I thought Pitt was going to handle West Virginia, and I was dead wrong. So I think this game alone is going to tell you a lot about this team, what they're going to have this year. Because the quarterback situation, we talked about it with Cal before. It's hard to have a 2 quarterback system. They're going to have to figure out their guy early, because once you get that guy, he can build confidence and get the weapons around him to be familiarity with his offense, especially with the new offensive coordinator as well. But then when you look at the other parts of their schedule, you see North Carolina, SMU, Clemson, and Louisville on there for conference. So they don't really catch the easiest schedule when it comes to the conference. They're going to be tested week in and week out. And I think when you look in here too, I just don't know where you can pencil in back-to-back wins for sure. It's just, you open up with Kent State, but then Cincinnati, they're a tougher team, I think, because this Pitt team isn't going to be as great this year. And then you get the backyard brawl week 3. Youngstown State's a game you should win. But then you get North Carolina, but then you get Cal, Syracuse, SMU. Like, you look at this schedule, and I just don't know where you have 2 back-to-back guaranteed wins for this team to figure it out this year.
All right, there's Pitt in 2024. JP, I'll go to you on this. I know you have a little bit of maybe still tied fandom to Pitt, but what do you think on this team this season?
Are we going to or is Mr. Narduzzi going to let the offense work on the offensive coordinator hire? Right? Like,
maybe.
Do you remember Kenny Pickett and Mark Whipple kind of lit the world on fire in 22? Whipple leaves. You bring in a new coordinator, and they go back to just ground and pound, run the football. Does not work out. The quarterback transfer doesn't hit. You don't play great offense. Like, it kind of blows up. And then he brings in a hire kind of back towards the Whipple style, a little more fast paced, a little more fun. You got to let them work, man. Otherwise, you're just going to work against each other and nothing's going to fly there. So if they work together, I think this team has a chance of going bowling. If not, man, like Reese said, I love the point. Can't pencil in back-to-back wins anywhere. I think they're going to have to fight for a lot of them.
Yeah, they had some shocking wins last year too. Jake, what do you think on Pitt in 2024? Can they avoid the back? Can they get 2 wins in a row off that schedule? What do you think?
Not with this offense at this point. Last year, look at this. They scored 6 against West Virginia, 7 against Notre Dame, 7 against Florida State, 13 against Syracuse. Syracuse did not have an all-world defense by any means. And Duke, they scored 19. Granted, that was a Mike Elko defense, but there's just a lot of games you're not scoring points. Reese made a good point about we're going to find out a lot about this team in the West Virginia game. I'd argue we're going to find out the week before because Cincinnati's not a very good Big 12 team by any stretch.
No.
And they got to travel on the road. This was a team who beat them at home last year, and they were favored in that football game. Now they're going to be the underdogs. Can they figure it out early, and can they score some points?
All right. That's Pitt football in 2024. Moving down the line, I am the last individual preview left, and I'm going to talk about Vautech. I think the college football world can all agree that college football is more fun when Vautech is good. Thursday nights at home with Enter Sandman before you play Notre Dame. We need that back in the world. And I think that these fans, from what I've seen on different social media platforms, think that this team can compete deeper than most believe this year. I think they're higher than people would probably make them out to be because of how down they've been. But they bring back some talent, man. They're one of the leading teams in the country in bringing back production from last year. They bring back 17 to 22 starters, including Kyron Drones, who was a Baylor transfer that stepped in last year played 11 games, and he was really good, man. I mean, they had both sides of the ball working at one point. Drones, let me be very clear. This is one of the cooler school records I've ever heard of. Threw 151 straight passes without a turnover. And in Virginia Tech times now, that was unheard of. It's not really something that they did, especially when they were struggling like they have been the last few years. So they're excited to get him back. You bring back a decent running back, but you bring back a lot of talent on the outside. You bring back Ali Jennings off of knee injury, who missed last year. He'll replace Stephen Gosnell, who will still make an impact on this team because Stephen Gosnell and Daquan Felton, they combined for over 1,500 yards last year. So they still had a good wide receiving core, and they just add to it with Ali Jennings coming back off that knee injury. The offense is there. They returned 9 out of 11 starters in general, and that includes on the offensive line. So they're going to score some points. They were averaging 43 points per game last year over their last 4 to end the season. So they expect to carry that over to 2024, and I think they can do so. Looking at the defense, you return 8 starters here. I don't want to say it's an secretly good defense because they're a top 20 national defense, and it's the first time they've been there since 2015. So I don't think people are really, I think you can call them a sleeper, but it wouldn't shock me if Virginia Tech was in the mix at the end of the year in this conference. Not at all, especially with the fandom that they have, the following, the atmosphere they can create, and the games they get at home. They can make some noise within this conference and nationally. They really can. You bring in a bunch of transfers on the defensive line, which I think is important because when they struggled getting teams down on the ground. Aeneas Peebles from Duke. They bring in Kamari Copeland, who's an Iowa Western transfer from just down the road from us. And then they bring in Kevin Gilliam Jr., the defensive tackle from OU. Those 3 guys can make up a lot of help on the defensive line, which you needed. And I really think Virginia Tech can be successful on both sides of the ball, make some noise. But when you look at their schedule, they miss Florida State, so that's a plus. But they do go play at Miami. And I think not enough people will give it enough credit. But hosting Rutgers, there's a little bit of rumblings around the Big 12 world about Rutgers being a pretty good team this year. So I don't know if you can mark that down as a tough game, but I think Virginia Tech has an opportunity here to get back into the national spotlight and make some noise in the ACC. JP, what do you think?
Yeah, I think this is one of the better secondaries in the country and definitely in the ACC. So if you can find a way, looking at your schedule, if you can slow down Miami, if you can slow down a Clemson through the year, make them one-dimensional, I think you really help yourself out. The schedule is definitely a reason why they're high on a lot of people's boards as a dark horse in the ACC.
I was going to put some perspective on the Jennings piece because you said he missed a time last year with a knee injury, but at Old Dominion, he was almost a 2,000-yard receiver in his 2 years there. So the talent is there. Can he recover from the injury? We'll have to wait and see. I'm not sold on this team being a dark horse in this league, though. It's a favorable schedule, yes, but I mean, you bring back a ton of production, but it's almost to prove it. I have to see it with this production and with these starters coming back because last year they lost to Purdue, Rutgers, and Marshall on a 3-game losing streak. They lost to Louisville. They lost to NC State. They lost to Florida State. I mean, they beat Pitt. They beat Boston College. At Boston College might have been their best win. They beat Wake Forest at home. They beat Syracuse, who was struggling at the time. They beat Old Dominion the first game of the year. They won the games they were supposed to, which is great. I'm just glad that Virginia Tech is kind of back in the bowling picture once again. But for this team to be legitimate for me and for it to be a dark horse, you've got to beat Clemson at home next year. Maybe you beat at Miami earlier in the year. You got to win some of these games where I want to see it against the real talent, basically.
I feel like, if you look at the way their schedule went and the way their season went, you can kind of see the strides better that way, because you start off
They definitely
1-3.
got better.
I mean, and then you start absolutely blasting the scoreboard. So I think carrying that over is kind of where that Virginia Tech hype lies within their fans. Reese, anything on the Hokies in 2024?
I got a little preview about him later, but I think Schaefer has a lot of good points about like the schedule and things, and so on and so forth. But I do have a lot of faith in their quarterback they have this year. I think that's the guy who's going to be able to potentially upgrade this team, I think, going forward.
All right, there's Virginia Tech. The last thing we have left to do is our new part. We are going to cover 5 teams in 5 minutes. I got a timer right here below me, and we are going to go through 5 different teams with the ones remaining, which they will.
Yeah, pardon the interruption style.
I will give you a general idea of where we're at, but with this many teams in a conference, it's hard to spend equal time on amounts without keeping you here for 2 hours. So
what order are we going in? Because we're
going to go from the ground up. I want to go last because I have 2 teams, so I'll just cover them back.
Go first and last.
I'll go first.
JP, Reese, myself, Jake to finish out his 2 teams. So
And
JP, you're going to lead it off with Virginia, and as soon as you start talking and we're in full view, we're going to go. So go ahead, JP, with Virginia.
The Virginia Cavaliers in 2024 here. Tony Elliott, might have the best offense he's had. He has quarterback Tony Muskett as well as Anthony Calandria, both solid options right here. Muskett was a transfer in last year, a season ago. Wide receiver room is talented. Chris Tyree, you might remember the name. He was at Notre Dame a season ago. A couple of those guys left a loaded receiver room. Can you get him to be your number 1 receiver on the outside? Malachi Fields is also a guy who has a chance to be on all ACC teams. When I talk Virginia here, is I'm worried with the schedule that they are taking on in 2024 is they could improve and still not see the record improvement. This is a program who really needs to get their footing back under them and hasn't done it in the last couple of years. Jonas Sanker as safety is going to be all ACC again. Both lines of scrimmages. This is what gets you better. Point blank, this is what needs to happen. You cannot give up 43 sacks on the offensive line, and you cannot only have 11 sacks in a single season. So it's got to get better in the trenches. You can have studs on a couple spots, but honestly, it's going to take a little bit more than 1 year for this team and Tony Elliott.
1 minute up. We're going down to Reese for Wake Forest. Take us through the Demon Deacons.
Demon Deacons. So this team over-under set at 4.5 wins for the year. They went 4-8 last season. In big part, they only averaged 20 points a game. And this is a team that the last 7 seasons averaged over 30 points a game. As a head coach, Dave Clawson's 11th season, the ACC Coach of the Year in 2021. It's a proven coach who knows how to win at a program that really isn't known for winning that much. And big thing for this team is that Wake Forest brings back 8 starters on offense and 7 starters on defense. They bring in a familiar name for their quarterback, too, to kind of contend for that starting spot by a guy by the name of Hank Bachmeier. I know Schaefer knows that guy. He spent 4 years in college so far at Boise State and then also at La Tech last year. A big thing for this team, too, they catch 7 games at home. They were 23-7 at home since 2019. They also catch Miami, NC State, and North Carolina on the road, and they get Clemson at home.
Okay, that was perfect. We're 2 minutes in. I'm going to take you through Stanford. Let's take a look at the Cardinal in 2024. Looking to bounce back off a 3-9 season. You don't really have the pieces to do so. You carry over a lot from that not very good team. However, I will give credit because Troy Taylor, now in his 2nd year, did get decimated by the max exodus that happened when he first came into this team. You return Ashton Daniel. However, you might have a little bit of a quarterback battle on your hand. You bring in a 4-star quarterback in Elijah Brown from high school, and he's going to compete for that job, man. You return Alec Ayomanor, who is the best receiver in the ACC. I'm putting that down right now. Might be a bold take, hot take, but you remember his 294-yard performance against Colorado last year, kind of blew up his name. The Canadian monster returns, and that is very important for them. On the defensive side of the ball, you could lose all your players, and it would probably help you. They were the 129th ranked defense in the country, allowing 460 yards a game and the most passing yards out of every team in the country. And you returned 5 of those 11 players. If you didn't return those 5, you might have a better step forward. However, I do think Stanford maybe gets that 4-win range. The schedule is not there either. It could be 3 again, or maybe even 2. They draw at Notre Dame. They draw at Syracuse. They play at Clemson. So the schedule doesn't line up. The key returners aren't enough to give you the production that you got last year, which was very little. So I'm not high on them at all. Jake, take us through the final two in Boston College and Duke.
Yeah, let's start with Boston College. Both of these teams going through coaching changes. Jeff Hafley heads to the Packers, steps in Bill O'Brien. He's coming back to college football, which I'm super excited about. I hope everybody else is as well. He tries to make sure that they're trying to get back to a bowl game. He's got his quarterback back in Thomas Castellanos. He's an underrated quarterback in this conference, one of the best scramblers in this conference, but 15 to 14 touchdown to interception ratio last year. He's got to improve his throwing game. Top receivers and top running back comes back. That's going to help out this offense. O'Brien brings in Tim Lewis at defensive coordinator. Fun fact, he hasn't coached collegiate football since 1992. He was doing some USFL stuff, a lot of NFL things. So the defense was below average last year. Can Lewis bring in his pro experience and help out that group? We'll have to wait and see. I'm excited to watch him. Let's transfer over to Duke, another team going through a coaching change. Mike Elko heads to Texas A&M, steps in Manny Diaz. I think this is an underrated story to follow along in this conference because I'm excited that Diaz is taking over as a head coach again. He gets Malik Murphy from Texas. I think a lot of people, if you're a college football fan, you know who Malik Murphy is, a great transfer portal pickup. That's going to be a starting quarterback. I'm really interested to see how they can mesh together and can they get this offense rolling. He's a defensive-minded coach. Duke went out and hired another defensive-minded head coach like they did with Elko. Diaz was over at Penn State, so I'm sure it's going to be a similar style of football. The linebackers are the returning strength piece on this team, but you lose the entire defensive line. Some just transferred out, some to the NFL. That's a concern for me. But it'll be a good start for Diaz, though. I think this is one of the easiest starts to a schedule that you can get. Elon at Northwestern, UConn at Middle Tennessee State, and then you get your rival North Carolina at home. So I think this is a coach that can get this team back to bowl eligibility.
Okay, there it is. That was 5 minutes and 19 seconds. We just took you through 5 previews. It's pretty good. Only beat it by 19 seconds. Maybe I went a little long-winded.
First time out here, no big deal.
But absolutely clean run for us. But there is the entire ACC team by team. The only thing we have left to do is tell you players to watch. The conference championship game, our sleepers, are maybe surprising teams, and then hot takes at the very end, and we got 10 minutes to do so. So let's leave it off with players to watch. I'll give you mine first just to get mine out of the way, but I graphicked him earlier in the week. JP talked about him. Jade not. 245 carries in 2023, 1,305 yards and 12 scores. He averaged 5.3 yards per carry, and this is the dude that you do not want to see in an opposing team's backfield. I can't believe Cal retained him, and he's definitely going to be a guy that you're going to see on Saturday mornings during College Game Day in featured players. But that is my player to watch. JP, who should we watch in the ACC this year?
I'll do the defensive side of thing, and forgive me if I pronounce this wrong, but it's a tougher name. Kie Thompson, linebacker at Pitt. He's an Ohio transfer, had 94 tackles a season ago in the MAC. I think this is a guy that'll work great in a Narduzzi defense, so this will be one to definitely pay attention to. Good linebackers are a ton of fun to watch when they, they're sideline to sideline and get north and south on teams.
Jake, who should we watch in the ACC this year?
I got to pick the duo between Grayson McCall and Kevin Concepcion. Concepcion was an all-conference guy last year, and they didn't have a stable quarterback. Sorry, Brendan Armstrong, you just really weren't. I'm excited to see what Grayson McCall do at the Power 4 level. He's got a number one option right away. If they want to get to 10 wins, it starts with the offense with Dave Doran, and those two could be a household name in college football if they can get that milestone.
Reese, tell us a player to watch.
I'm also going defensive, but I'm staying a little more to my home roots up here in New York. So I'm going Fadil Diggs. This is a guy, 6'5", 260, the former 4-star from Texas A&M. I went to the spring game. And this guy won the defensive spring MVP, whatever the award was for this team. So it's a guy who's not in Syracuse taking his time for granted. He's putting his head down and he's doing the work. And I'm not sure the last time Syracuse was able to recruit or get a guy, especially in the portal world that we're in right now, get a guy of this kind of a caliber who, look, we talked about their schedule before. This is a team that could potentially be 5-0, 6-0 to start the year. And if they are, this is going to be a guy that's going to be a common name for a lot of college football people, because I think he has the potential to be a game wrecker for this defense, especially with that high-powered offense we have. If you can get a guy that can put pressure on the quarterback on the other side of the field and just make them uncomfortable and help that defense get stops, I think this guy is going to be a very good name to know for college football this year.
Reese, what was your analysis on Diggs? You got quick feet, aggressive hands. You got long swing.
It was only in for about the first half, and they didn't let him go too crazy out there. But he was still in there doing a little bit of work.
Limited talent. Limited talents. Like what we
They're
like.
letting him rest. Ain't gonna hurt him in the spring game. They only let Kyle McCord in there for the first half too, and he was throwing some dots. He had guys wide open. Granted, he's throwing in Syracuse now, but whatever.
All right, there's your players to watch. Let's move on to the conference championship game. JP, I'll let you lead it off. Who you got playing it and who you got winning it?
Yeah, I went back and forth this a ton. I'd love to put SMU in this spot, but I think the Power 4 thing's a little too much for the jump. I think the ACC schedule helps them. I'm going to go Clemson, NC State here. I'm going to roll the dice with Dabo. I think this would be a good team. The defense reloads and resets. All guys have been in Clemson for a year or two that are going to start now. I'm very confident in them. I go NC State based on the ACC schedule that they were given, as well as, again, I believe in Dave Doran. I believe that defense will be better, and I think the offense will be one of the better in the conference. So Clemson versus NC State.
I like that. And you got Clemson winning it? Is that what you said?
Correct. Yeah, I have Clemson winning the ACC in 2024.
I like that. Reese, who do you got in this conference championship game, and who do you have winning it?
Kind of similar to JP. I got NC State in there, but I got them playing against Miami. I like all the points JP makes about this NC State team, that improving defense and that offense and that schedule they have. But I'm going to take Miami in this one. I know it's put up or shut up for this Miami team, but I think it's time. Like, we are a Cam Ward podcast, and you gave him all the weapons around. If that defense can be just top 30, top 20 with the quarterback you have in Cam Ward and all those weapons you have on offense, I think this could be a very good Miami team. Especially when you're getting this 12-team playoff system we have this year. I think they can really make a run for this thing.
All right, I like that. Jake, tell us yours and who you got winning it.
Yeah, I think the NC State pick is a great point because I know the divisions helped this cause a couple of years ago, but when's the last time we've seen preseason chalk with the 1 and 2s playing each other in this conference for a conference title? Like last year, you had Louisville. They weren't picked 2. They were like in that 4 or 5 spot, like NC State, similar situation. But then you still had Florida State. This time around, I'm going to go Clemson and Miami. I know it's 2 and 3, so it's not that unimaginary, but I just think with Clemson, I'm going to trust Dabo one more time. Just quote me on that. So when we circle back around next year, just let me know that I trusted Dabo one more time.
I quoted him. I trusted him last year. Just a heads up. See how that played out for me.
And then Miami, I almost think this team is too talented that Mario Cristobal can't screw it up. Maybe he will, but this team
Georgia Tech was a pretty bad
talented for me. Yeah,
fair enough.
I'm picking them though.
Give me Clemson then if you got Clemson over Miami for my pick.
I'll throw them in there. I don't want to blow you guys away here, but I'm going to put Florida State against Miami. I think that would be a fun one. I think we got every combination that would probably be out in the college football world. But Miami doesn't worry me very much, Jake, for your reasons. Plus, I was really worried about maybe Cam Ward getting too much attention, maybe getting a turnover bug. But when Damian Martinez gets added that late and you take pressure off him with an elite back like that, I really think that this Miami offense is too loaded to not make a run to this title game. And then
could we get a Florida State Miami and an Ohio State Michigan conference championship weekend?
That would be.
What if we get a Texas Oklahoma SEC? That probably won't happen, but
hey, you never know. You never know.
College football, hey, crazy. We can talk about whatever we want.
But then Florida State, I think DJU can step in there. I think they still have talent on the outside, and I think Mike Norvell, if he's as good as a coach as he made himself out to be last year, you'll find him in that championship game again. Look what he did with the roster that was depleted, and I think they'll find themselves in a similar spot and in the college football playoff because I have them winning this conference. So we have 2 Clemson, 1 Florida State, and then Reese, your pick was NC State?
I have Miami over NC State.
Okay, Miami winning it. So we got some different takes here. That'll be a fun graphic to make, but there's the conference championship game. Last piece. Anybody have any surprising teams this year? Mine was Viatech. I talked about them, so I already told you why. But JP, who do you have as your surprising team?
I just think Cal's going to scare more people than we realize. That's a team that's nobody's going to talk about, honestly, or give the time of day before their first year in the ACC. So I think they'll scare some people. I'll call them a surprise team.
I think that's fair. What about you, Jake?
Is it surprising if Syracuse wins 8 or 9 games? I mean, we know about their schedule, but is that still a surprise? I'm saying they're my surprise team because Athlon has them picked 11th, but yeah, that's going to be because I think the casual college football fan probably has no idea what the situation at Syracuse is right now. And then they
You
see
can
maybe
say surprise because
Is it
if
you-
they win 9 games, all of a sudden they're in
you
that
see a
mix. In
Syracuse
the
football team with 9 wins, you'd be like, oh,
Yeah, 9
yeah,
wins.
they'll
9
crack the
wins,
top
and
25 and you'll be like, how did Syracuse get
You're
there?
Syracuse, yeah.
yeah, I like that. Reese, do you have a surprising team or a disappointing team? We'll move it down the list as well.
well, disappointing. I'm gonna go with Louisville. I just think when you're relying on the portal as much as you are, I mean, we look at what happens in Colorado and a team that really doesn't have that much of a foundation. I think Jeff Brown's a different coach compared to Deion Sanders. But I still think when you're going in the portal that much, I'm not sure how much of a camaraderie you're building or your morale for that team. So I think it's gonna be different. Also because they took full advantage of that schedule they had last year, and they do not have that same schedule this year. So disappointing by their measures. I don't think they're going to be an 8 or 9 win team. I think they'll be middle of the pack. They'll still make a bowl game, but I think kind of with the expectations they have, I think it'll be disappointing.
I feel like I can comfortably say Jake and JP, I can put Florida State as your disappointing teams, right? Because if you don't have them in the conference title game, I don't think their fan base would disagree that it was disappointing.
No, I have Miami.
You think Miami's the disappointing team?
I think Miami, relative to everybody's expectations for a team that hasn't quite done it yet, I think 9 wins is disappointing to them. So I have them there because I don't have them winning 10 or 11 games.
Okay. What about you, Jake?
Just to be quick on that.
Yeah, I mean, if Florida State wins 9 games, it's not going to be disappointing to me. I think they're going to be in the mix. I just don't know if they're going to get over the hump of being in the conference title. For me, my disappointing team's Georgia Tech. Like JP mentioned, they might get better. They might look better, but they have a brutal schedule, and I still think the defense is just really bad. So it's just a bad mix.
It's okay because Brent Key's used to the haters. He's used to the doubters. So I have no problem with Ramberlin Rec rolling out 7 games again. But all right, that's the ACC. Any bold takes or hot takes to close us out quickly?
I'm good.
Yeah, like 10 seconds.
No, I'm just.
Oh, you're good. It's not going to kick us off.
Yeah, no, we got 2 hours for time. We just we're trying to
keep it rolling.
But I thought we had some programming
no
limitations.
No, I was going to say, unless we're about to find out in 10 seconds. So if so, thanks for joining us.
Not a question or not a hot take, but I think an underrated storyline in college football this season is how does the Pac-12 transfer to all of their conferences? Because last year we saw, those American teams struggle in the Big 12. They're, basically bridging the gap, right? They're not taking a step up in competition. They're not necessarily taking a step down in competition. I'm really interested on how these teams play in the ACC and how the rest of the Pac-12 plays in their other respective conferences.
All right, there it is. That's the ACC conference in 2024.